A little more than a year and a half ago, I decided that I will pivot all of my free time and try to learn to draw. And it's been quite an experience ever since. You see, my life has never been connected to arts, so majority of my friends were not artists, and majority of my activities were not related to art. I still have this feeling that I broke the matrix and I broke through into some weird alternative reality where now everything feels to be gearing up into artistry. And along the way, I wanted to share my experience. I wanted to share my journey, the wins, the losses, everything that worked, didn't work, the frustrations, and a lot of these other things that happen kind of internally as you try to become an artist, or at least in my head, I'm trying to become an artist. And in today's video, I want to focus on 3 things. So I have a small update on the skill tree. I categorized everything into levels, how it flows in my head right now. I also want to share a bit more about materials, and last but not least, how I use my very own skill tree to practice. So without further ado, let's dig in. On a high level, everything is categorized from level 0 to level 5. I try to make these topics progressively getting harder. Again, this is my own perception of these topics, which means that it's going to be quite individual what you consider to be more difficult, or even, if you consider this to be a good topic to study. Everything is color-coded. If you have seen the first version of the skill tree, I kept the same colors, and these are foundations, scenes and objects, portraits and characters. So at level 0 we have lines, curves and thickness. This has a lot to do with your ability to control your hand better. Can you create a perfect line? Can you create a curve, a C curve that looks nice with good line quality, and also can you make different thickness? I do these for warm-up. Still, I try to do it at least a few times a week so I don't lose the motoric skills. Additionally, right under it we have basic shapes, and these are just splitting up into circles, squares and ellipses. I think it's still important to note that even the most experienced artists are still practicing these basic shapes quite a bit, so there is a reason why they can draw a perfect circle or a perfect ellipse. Additionally, here on the right hand side we have composition, so having a few compositional topics that you keep in mind. And let's say when you're practicing basic shapes, maybe you can try to incorporate this composition practice and create some sort of composition from these shapes. Additionally, I added small, medium and large, and these are with the idea to variate different sizes. So not to have, let's say, an even split between small objects, medium and large, but rather have an interesting variation and try to create these composition scenes from those. Last but not least, I also have gestures here, which maybe feels a little unfair to put in level 0, especially if I look at myself. I don't know how to properly draw gestures just yet. However, what I noticed is that it is essentially a depiction of body or shape, or it can also represent a particular body part or even like an animal and whatnot. Last but not least, the final item that I have at level 0 are also silhouette drawings. These are super important for character creation. A lot of the courses that I've done so far where they're teaching you how to create a character, how to pick these basic shapes, what do these shapes kind of symbolize, and what is the feeling that they give. Another thing that is really good to notice is the silhouette says a lot. Like if you ever saw these Guess the Pokemon meme, it does imprint in your mind quite well to remember what type of character it is. So essentially silhouette creation is quite a good practice. Moving on, we have level 1 where things get slightly more interesting. So we have 3D shapes that go together with value, and value can be depicted also by symbolizing different textures. You want to also add shadows. And when I refer to these shapes, I'm mostly referring to cubes, spheres, pyramids, cylinders, all of those basic objects that kind of have a perception of basic perspective, a perception of having an object occupying space in this 3-dimensional setting. Moving on, we have level 2, and here things start to get slightly more complex. So I added here organic shapes. I think it's a very good practice to try and draw wireframes on odd shaped objects. The main difference for me, at least for organic shapes, is the fact that a lot of the edges are round, so it's slightly more complicated to depict the volume of this particular object that you're drawing. I also added structured figures, which essentially is a combination of basic 3D shapes that kind of represent the human body. We have Loomis, Asaro, and Riley rhythms, which are methodologies to draw the face. We cover these a lot more in topic in another video where I focus on portraits, but I think these are super good practices, and they also teach you a very good way to put together these basic shapes to have a representation of a face. I added here objects 1, which is essentially simple objects such as a cup or maybe a vase. And last but not least, we also have thumbnail creation and color theory. Now, thumbnail creation is essentially when you're trying to depict a scene in a very simplified manner. I put thumbnails in level 2 mostly because I started using them a lot later. I usually do them when I'm trying to create a painting, because then it makes sense to have a quick glance how the composition is gonna look. And I also added color theory. So before we looked at everything in, let's say, different shades of black and white and gray, and now adding color theory into the mix kind of makes these things slightly more complex because colors also have different tonal values. Moving on to level 3. So here I think things get slightly more complex. So we're adding objects that are human-made and are quite complex in nature, including coffee machines or sewing machines or any type of machinery, buildings, cars. I think it's a very interesting practice to try and draw cars because there's so many bits and pieces that go into design when you're creating a car. So just trying to replicate it on a piece of paper really makes you think a lot about how to properly depict these objects in 3D space. I also added textures 2, which is now going into things that are maybe reflective, going into metals or trying to depict water and things like that. Slightly more complicated organic objects, trees or particular leaves, flowers, all of those things. Landscape drawings, I personally barely practice any landscape drawings, mostly because I have this a bit lower in my own priority. I think it's quite important to have an understanding how to depict a landscape, as later when you're trying to create scenes, this is quite important. And I also added clothing folds. So here you're trying to depict the material using the shadows and basically showing where the cloth folds. And last but not least, simplified body parts. So now we're entering this sphere where you're trying to depict hands, feet, or legs in a simplified fashion, but it's still possible to understand that. Moving on, we have level 4, and I believe we're entering this area where a lot of advice is saying not to study this. And I understand why they're trying to say this, mostly because you're probably gonna get so overwhelmed and whatnot, but I'll tell you this, if I look back in high school, I think I did anatomy, 9th grade, which is when I was around 16. I still don't really see a reason, if you feel like trying to understand anatomy and study different subjects or, different skeletal parts, why you shouldn't do that. So since it's my own practice, I do whatever I want, and I put skeletons and anatomy here, and right underneath it, I also have complex body parts. So now we're talking about having a clear depiction of fingers, having a clear depiction, let's say, where you have difference in curvature, for example, in your muscles, in your forearms, or in your legs. And I also have scene creation. I think it's quite interesting to try to create a scene where you can sort of control the mood, maybe control the lighting, and have a particular feel where your subject is either placed in the middle, maybe it's in the side, maybe there's more than one subject, and kind of have a creative process where you're trying to create this scene. And last but not least, level 5. As you can see, this is the most empty level right now, as the idea is to also, along the way, I'll try to keep on updating this skill tree. And I just believe I'm still kind of more practicing in lower levels, but in level 5 I've added facial expressions, so trying to depict where somebody is maybe happy or sad. If you look at a lot of these really known paintings, quite often they have a clear depiction of a particular emotion in somebody's face. And alongside it, for both, drawing the figure and drawing portraits, you also have different variations in age, in muscle mass, in height, young old. All of these things kind of combine, brings a new level of complexity when you're trying to depict these on a piece of paper. Now, all of these levels, all of these topics, I think it's one thing to, first of all, of course, find where to study and find where you can learn them. Ideally, you do a course or from somebody who's experienced and who can teach you well, to have an understanding how to do it, but also have an understanding how to practice on your own. Because in most cases, I think my biggest problem with a lot of the courses that I've done in person is that they were lacking a system where you can study on your own. Because realistically, even if you spend 4 hours in a course, and let's say you do this a few times, it's still really not enough, because until it goes deep into your head, it takes a lot of practice. Now, a little bit here on the left, I added all the materials that I've purchased so far. So the purpose of listing all of these materials, especially the ones on the left-hand side, these different concepts that we covered from levels 0 to 5 are still worth practicing with different materials and mediums, because essentially it kind of opens up different gaps, and maybe you are very skilled and talented using ink pen, but it doesn't really work that well with graphite, and maybe there's something that you can learn about this medium in particular that later helps you to become a better artist. And that's what I tell myself why I rotate mediums. The other reason is, of course, it's just more fun. Final bit of how do you actually do practice, using this skill tree. So most importantly, things that work for me might not work for everybody, and I completely acknowledge that. I'm more depicting what I'm studying rather than trying to share how to study it. So everything should be taken with a grain of salt, since I'm a beginner myself. I recently did this statue study, and I tried to practice doing a bit of digital art. So I normally always start with a rough gesture. So I try to depict this kind of figure, where the motion is going, what is the expressive gesture that I'm seeing. I move on to have a very rough shape representation, kind of trying to capture these big shapes of the figure that I'm drawing. Moving on, I then have a more boxified version of the drawings. The idea is to try to understand the position of each body part and the 3D space that it's occupying. Also helps you a lot to understand and learn to see better. So it is an observational practice to try and understand maybe which part is facing up, which part is facing down. Later on, this is going to help you to depict shadows better. I move on to a slightly more detailed version of that. So I try to round the edges, round, the shape of the head, the elbows, the hands, the legs. And here I'm also still trying to keep things relatively loose, just trying to get these basic feel for the figure. I then go on to depicting and try to depict a more detailed version of the drawing. So here it's basically, since I was using digital ink in the next step, it's more preparation to line work, and last but not least, I do the line work, I add the shadows, and then later I add the highlights. So the purpose of the skill tree is to have a menu that you can look at, pick and choose a few things, choose a complexity that serves you well, and just go around and practice. You can rotate mediums, try out new mediums, and I think it's been quite a wild ride trying to learn to draw so far. I wanted to take a chance to also say thank you so much for the support. Thank you for subscribing, and I hope to continue making videos. I hope to continue updating this skill tree along the way as things progress. Most importantly, I hope that some of these concepts and topics are useful to you. Maybe you can incorporate them in your own studies or trying to learn to draw better. This was another episode of Make Journey. I wanted to say thank you so much for watching, and I wish you a lovely day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.